Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Welcome. We were sitting here listening to Mark brag about how many monsters he's written for Pathfinder, second edition. How many have you written, Mark, do you think? 100? 200?
A lot,
300?
Steven. It's just funny when you were bragging about how
I was bragging. I was saying I got 4. I got
Okay,
4 that will
fair
be
enough.
relevant to this topic. And Mark's like, oh, 4. I do that in a day. I'm like, I'm Mr. Monster. Actually, you're not. That's Patrick Rennie. He's Mr. Monster. You're Mr. Rules.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know you've called him Mr. Monster before.
He
but
called
there's
himself
he
Mr.
called
Monster.
himself Mr. Monster.
That's
Well,
why I used
explains
that
it.
term.
Okay.
That's
Fair
why
enough.
I
There's
didn't.
definitely several people at Paizo, including me, who have gone through more monsters than that, and several who've gone through more monsters than I have. But Patrick definitely knows his stuff when it comes to monsters.
So yes, he called himself Mr. Monster when I approached him to help me run the first RPG Superstar
That
contest.
explains it. You didn't come up with that. All right.
No, he's like, oh, yes, I'd love to. I'm known as Mr. Monster or something to that effect. I actually have the email. I can look it up.
Yeah, fair enough.
And now
I
he's
believe you.
Mr. 5e Monster or WotC Monster, whatever he's doing over there at WotC Land.
I don't know if it'll be the monsters or something else.
I doubt he's doing monsters. Anyhow, we have another new face to the program because we just like to get new people on the show and rotate them in. Who are you, Mike? Who's this Mike guy that we got with us?
Hi, I'm Mike Holik. I am the editor-in-chief of Mage Hand Press, so I do all the writing and editing and graphic design for a bunch of 5e products. I made a sci-fi conversion for 5e called Dark Matter, and an expansion for D&D 5e. Yeah, you've got Dark Matter. There
I got
we go.
Dark Matter. I don't have your other one. You never. I have the. I have
Our
the
new
PDF.
one is Valda's Spire of Secrets, which is a collection of 10 base classes and over 150 subclasses. So it's designed to just, setting neutral, just expand 5e. And we have a book on Kickstarter right now called The Book of Extinction, which tells the real stories of extinct animals and then kind of reimagines each of those animals as a mythical creature that's suitable for your campaign. So we're going to have a ton of monsters to talk about. And if you ask nicely, I'll tell you some very, very sad stories about some of those extinct animals.
Well, I saw you have the Dodo, and the Dodo's not sad. I mean, it's sad, but it's a fun monster. So
the Dodo is kind of wild because it died out so fast due to introduced predators that a lot of what we know about the Dodo is sort of like guessed or like it's actually other birds and they were using the wrong term for it, kind of polluting the historical timeline. But the Dutch actually called it the Waggevogel, which means disgusting bird because it made a terrible stew. But it was easy to catch. It was it was a bird that just kind of ran, a flightless bird that was easy to shoot and turn into a stew. So
what about the passenger pigeon? You got that in there too?
Of course. The American passenger pigeon, for those of you who don't know, was like a hilariously abundant bird. Like it stretched horizon to horizon.
Billions of them. Billions.
Insane numbers. And it's incredible to imagine a world, literally, like in the history books, not super long ago, where there was just this incredibly, incredibly abundant game bird that migrated across North America that is completely now extinct. The very last one was named Martha. We obviously have reimagined that as like this swarm creature in the Book of Extinction because
I'm looking at it now. The passenger pigeon.
Yeah. Dodos actually have a lot of monsters already. I guess like the Axebeak is kind of like a dodo, and then the Wackadodo in Battle Zoo Best Series Strange and Unusual, the two-headed dodo.
Two-headed dodo. We have a dodo. You got 2 heads are better than 1, and it's really colorful and silly. But we have my favorite extinct animal of all time now, because I didn't even know this existed, is Stevens Island Ren.
The Stevens Island Ren.
Island Ren.
there is a myth that on this little rocky island called Stevens Island, that a single tabby cat named Tibbles exterminated an entire species of wren. And the story behind that is actually a little more complicated and a little more devilish. It involves men who were systematically jacking up the prices of specimens of this wren because they knew that it was inevitably going to go extinct, and they did nothing about it except, so basically the British press ended up learning about this new type of bird, this like little flightless bird on this island that kind of like it filled the niche of a mouse. It like hopped between the rocks on the shore, and like a few introduced cats owned by the lighthouse keeper, drove them extinct very, very, very quickly, to the point that the British public learned about the wren and its extinction in basically the same breath. And it is a weirdly tragic story, and no one's really sure why. Like it's credited to a single cat, but it might as well have been. Right? Like it took so few cats to exterminate all of the birds on this island, which is going to be a kind of a recurring theme in this book. If you know anything about conservation, that like basically anything that lives on an island is automatically endangered because it's so easy to knock over the whole population in a short period of time.
I'm looking at it now, and it's spelled the right way. It's spelled Stephen with a PH. So I was like, wow, what's my name doing in a monster book? That's like part of a monster. There you go.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this Kickstarter and talk about monsters and extinct monsters. But the one thing we wanted to talk about, and of course, if you have any questions, we're live, so like and subscribe. But one thing that I've done 4 times that I can remember, and Mark has done 4 million times, and now Mike has an entire book of this, is taking animals of extinction or legend or creatures and turning them into actual monsters for 5e Pathfinder. Because it's tricky, especially because, like, how do you make like a Dodo interesting for a book, like a monster book, and Dodo is actually kind of interesting. The story of it's interesting, but how do you make it interesting for an encounter? How do you actually make a passenger pigeon, as you said, interesting? It's like, okay, this is like little pigeon. How much damage can it do? What can a pigeon do?
Stuck to just the original creature, right? Like the Wackadodo not only has 2 heads, it does an awkward dance that can fascinate creatures and has a gyrating fever disease. So like you could just add in other elements, I think.
I think with the Dodo, that's actually a really instructive place to start, because you're not really building it off of the Dodo itself. All of these animals in the real world left an echo of mythology, and the Dodo was really popularized by Lewis Carroll as this absurdist thing, running a caucus race in which everyone wins, and being one of the main characters of Alice in Wonderland means you tie it into the Feywild, and you give it the ability to confuse people, and you kind of lean into that legacy that it's left behind instead of the animal itself. So there is still a legend attached to each of these things. The fact that the word Dodo means there's a legend. So it's not all that different from building something out of actual mythology.
So how are you approaching this, Mike? Like so you have a book that has both creatures that are, is it just real world extinct creatures, or do you also have creatures of legend that don't?
Yeah. So sometimes the creatures, it's real world animals. In fact, not even just animals in general. We focused on human caused extinction. So if these things lived and died before humans were around, we don't pay attention to those mostly. We do have a section on megafauna, which don't have this sort of reimagining because, the Siberian unicorn and, a saber-toothed tiger, they don't need us to reimagine them as something scary. They're already terrifying. So for these extinct animals, we write an actual detailed description of their history. We learn a lot about them. We have a science consultant. The book is made in partnership with the Center for Biological Diversity. So we have a science consultant who comes in and checks our work, who we cite all of our sources in a reference section in the back of the book. And then we kind of look at elements of that either really appeals to us to like make a legacy, or we find actual cryptids or mythological creatures that these things inspired. So a good example of this might be Haast's eagle. This is one of these huge birds in New Zealand. If you don't know anything about the environment of New Zealand, it's like a lot of the big animals there are just birds, or were just birds. They didn't have as many mammals filling the ecological niches that big mammals do elsewhere. So they had this enormous eagle, and the Maori also had this legend of the Hakawai, which is this like bird that sort of flies out into the dark night and like vanishes beyond the sky, and then like comes back as this messenger of the gods. So a lot of the time it's fun to imagine this as something that's either flying into the astral plane or space, depending on how you frame that in your campaign, because it has these weird similarities to the way we think about that now. So this extinct animal directly inspired a real mythical creature that is like extremely cool and has all these different legends attached to it. So yeah, sometimes it's just done for us. Like history did all the work, and those are the easiest. Those are the best.
What about a saber-toothed were-tiger?
That so we have an entire chapter that we're introducing of reimagined D&D monsters. Okay. So we're doing like this. Okay, imagine what if lycanthropy is a disease based on a monster. What if the monster dies out but lycanthropy stays? What if there's a rare strain of lycanthropy that can turn you into a were-tiger or a were-mammoth? The were-mammoth only affects giants, but still. There's a dire wolf. What about a dire werewolf? What does that look like? So it gave us this ability to talk about scarier types of lycanthropes based on real-world inspiration. I'm really excited about all the monsters in this book, and we've got a lot to go through. But yeah, I don't want to talk over Mark.
Yeah, no problem.
Were you going to talk, Mark?
No. We were asking you about how you went about the extinct animals. So I was just listening.
Wonderful.
So when it comes to actually making these, since you've done so many, Mark, why don't you tell me what is your process? I have my process, sure. But let's go through yours.
So whenever you're creating a monster, the first thing that you need is a good concept. And so creating from a legend, from a cryptid, from an urban legend, a fossil, an extinct animal, that's a great place to get a concept to create your monster, to get a starting point of what you want your monster to be like. It's not the end point, like we were talking about with the Dodo. I completely agree with Mike. It's not a coincidence that his Dodo description of being from the realm of the Fae and having confusion shared something in common with the Wagadodo's confusing dance, and it's because of the starting concept. Kind of, you can peel back the layers and find out like what that concept makes you think and how that makes you feel. So the concept is not the ending, and that is an issue that sometimes happens with people who are starting off their monsters, particularly in D&D 5e. If you look at the ones from the monster manual, they sometimes are just like, this owlbear only has multi-attack. Well, I guess that's a thing. So they may take the concept and be like, that's it. That's all I'm going to do. But when you get a little bit more advanced, you think about adding more facets to the monster as you're moving along. Now, sometimes that goes too far. So a little bit too gung-ho designer, particularly one who is trying to enter like the RPG Superstar contest might be like, well, I need to put in 12 different abilities onto this monster. And so I often offer a tempering advice, which is like, hold on, make sure you think about how many rounds it's even going to be alive, how many things it's going to get to do, how the actions compete with each other. But you take that concept, you come up with some cool ideas on how to expand it, and you move from there. Generally, with the concept, I want a high concept, and I probably want a level range or a level, because once I know what level it is, I can start thinking about what abilities I'm going to put into it and some other features that might change dramatically if I'm imagining it at a very low or a very high level. So that's sort of how I would go about creating a creature, is a top-down process rather than a bottom-up.
Stephen, Mark, I would love to interject and talk about that simplicity angle, because it is so critical to so many areas of design that you don't create something more complex than people are willing to engage with. Ultimately, what role-playing games are they're like traditional software, but the people at the table are the computer, and people don't have an infinite amount of patience. They have a limited amount of bandwidth, especially if they're trying to also wrangle a complex story or some unruly characters or their own metabolism after a few drinks. So it's really important that you sell your ideas with the strongest, simplest versions of those ideas. I always talk about additional mechanics having a weight to them, and they have to like buy that weight with value. So a really cool mechanic might simply just be too heavy for the thing that you're trying to do with that monster. It doesn't make sense to have something that takes more than a couple of die rolls to resolve if you're going to have a swarm of them, for example. So these are some sort of like ultimately really basic design angles, but it's easy to lose track of them if you're a new designer creating a monster. That these things need to be played by other people who don't actually care that much about the complexity of something, as long as they can get there.
Yeah, I think putting spells in monsters is a classic trap that leads to monsters that are overcomplicated, because you not only have to look up those spells, they all compete with each other for what the monster is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what your monster is going to do, and then don't put in too many abilities that compete with each other for what it's going to do. If you have something that's reactive, that doesn't compete with something that's going to use up your creature's actions in Pathfinder or your creature's action in 5e. And then if you have a bunch that use the bonus action in 5e, it's not going to be able to use all of those at the same time. It's the same sort of situation there. I'd say the graph for design, it starts out with like maybe the earliest design are people who under-design. They just are like, oh, this is a creature. It has multi-attack. I'm done. But quickly it moves from too low to quickly to like way too high. And then it goes down from there as designers learn that you can make an amazing monster that's very evocative elegantly, and that shows off your talent and your design skill more than being able to come up with a monster that has
and usually
pieces, even if they all fit together well.
And usually that more elegant design reinforces the core mechanics of the game in ways that make the experience a better total experience. If you're using fewer mechanics but you're using them better, you're not inventing your own mechanics and then kind of building on this Jenga tower of stuff that it's easy for people to forget. If it just relies on much more core mechanics in cleverer ways, you're sort of painting with a thicker brush, but it's much easier for everybody to follow and normally has greater impact.
That's true. You can generally evoke the theme that if you are able to elegantly put something into the mechanic that just feels right and it carries your message, then it can kind of evoke the theme, the feeling, and the overall sort of zeitgeist of the monster more than having a bunch of different abilities will, and make you kind of feel what the designer wants you to be feeling when you're fighting that opponent. Now, that's not to say that it's easy to do that. It's not very easy to do that. I sometimes give some examples from Pathfinder 2nd edition about not in monster design, but like it's really hard in any edition of most RPGs for people to design time spells that are not like a headache and really obnoxious for anybody to use. Time spells, time items, time-based effects. For example, I still remember from an earlier edition of D&D, there was an amulet that was so game-breakingly not overpowered, but just cumbersome that it made the entire act of playing the game a chore until it was used for the day, and then everything was fine. It was a necklace that, as like a reaction-based ability, it would rewind time by a full round, going back through everybody's turn.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
And so it's a nightmare because you have to be accounting everything that happened since you're like.
As far as I'm concerned, that's just poor design. Chronomancy has its own layer of like nonsense where it's like every chronomancy thing has the same theme. You can't really differentiate them in interesting ways. It's
the challenge, right? But a talented designer can. They can figure out how to do it, make it feel like it's time, and not be a huge issue where it's doing things like that. That's my feeling, and we have some examples in Pathfinder 2nd. Like there's a spell Cast into Time. What it does is it throws someone through time, and they go through like probably this psychedelic thing where they see a bunch of different time streams and a bunch of different things are like bombarding them, and then they wind up getting sickened and taking damage as they're thrown out at the end of the turn of the spellcaster who did that. So they don't lose a turn. They don't like go back or forth in the actual time stream in the end, because even though they were cast through time, they pop back out. And that manages to be a spell that's easy to run because ultimately you're just doing the damage from being cast through time and adding the second condition. Super, super easy to run. It really feels like something was happening with time. And so you can do it, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it's about evoking that idea, right? You don't have to demonstrate that idea on like a gritty level, as long as you can kind of get there. And when it comes to monster design, there's really obvious and subtle ways to do this. Changing damage types, changing like resistances and things like that evoke a lot more, even if they're not massively mechanically relevant in a combat, because you can kind of get some of those points across in a really grounded way. I think we've tipped my hat that I'm much more of a mechanics designer at the end of the day rather than like a thematic one, which means like, you know, it's really a boon to me to have these like really interesting, rich, real world stories that you can connect with, you know, like from the monster's original concept, and then I can punch it up with as much, you know, mechanical flair or elegance as I want.
I feel like the two are connected. Mechanics and lore are something that a truly top designer is going to make them fit together hand in hand. Make it so it really feels like you're playing the thing that you're supposed to be playing.
It's the magic of role-playing games, and I wish there was a really good word for this idea of when a mechanic feels like the thing that it's doing.
Maybe,
you know,
ludonarrative consonance. There's ludonarrative dissonance.
Maybe, right? Yeah. But it's something so fundamental to the way that literally everything in the game is designed, and I think this actually is a bigger point when it comes to player mechanics than monster.
Oh yeah,
mechanics.
Absolutely. It's not just in tabletop games.
It's literally a true gaming thing. What's interesting about monsters is that sometimes having that sort of rhyme doesn't actually matter as much from the DM's perspective, because the ease of running multiple monsters and stuff can actually outweigh that in interesting ways. But it sort of depends on what type of monster we're creating.
No, absolutely. GM focused things with hacks in them can sometimes be better for playability, although they may not be as good for immersion for the GM, but for players, you really need to drill down on that. It's something that I'm going through now. I'm working on the Elemental Avatar class for Pathfinder 2nd edition that we're then going to also do in D&D 5e. And I want each of the elements, which we have 13 initially, they'll eventually be 20, including time, but fortunately they're not in the first 13, to have a different play style, and I want them to feel like that element. So fire is all about like set things on fire, do lots of damage, but cold is like slowly freeze the enemy over time, and then they have to make decisions about whether they're spending their actions to get back up their movement speed. And maybe electricity will be able to like build up charge and then use the electric charge to get more benefits over time.
I like that. You can have these mechanical leitmotifs that kind of build their way through things. Yeah, it's really cool.
Even in board games, like one of, if not my favorite board game, is Spirit Island, and I like it because of that, we'll say, ludonarrative consonance, where if I'm playing the ocean, I'm really powerful, but I'm limited. I can't really go past the places that are right next to the edges of the map because you're on an island, because I am the ocean. I can surround it. I'll eat everything that is on the shore, but I'm almost powerless in the center of the map, and I have to have my tide come in and my tide come out during play, and that influences what I'm doing, and that really feels like being the ocean, even though obviously they're just like little pieces on the board and you're moving them around. And
yeah, but I mean that's what makes games so magical. I mean there is a magic to that that's kind of hard to put words to. Polar Bear Bar from the chat asked, will these monsters be like the old monster manual, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, or the newer things you can find in Monsters of the Multiverse? The answer to that is actually a little complicated. We've sort of been designing them with monster manual stuff in mind, but we're going to go through and update everything to the newer kind of design of monsters. I actually agree with almost everything they've been doing with monsters in updated 5e stuff in terms of making it easier to play and a little more evocative. Giving spellcasters just spell attacks in the action section, I think, is a bold choice they should have done years ago. It's really, really solid. So we're sort of, if you took a look at the book where it is right now, you'd sort of see a hodgepodge, but those are all going to be kind of iterated to the most streamlined version of those that exists. And then that's going to look a lot like the stuff they're putting out in D&D books right now. We're not going to address what's happening with 6th edition or any of that nonsense, because I don't even want to imagine what they're going to do with their monsters. The way it's been going so far, it could be terrible.
It might be good.
It might be good. They have some seriously talented designers over there.
Really talented designers on it. I don't see any reason why they would make it worse than it is. So I'm assuming it's probably going to be similar or maybe a little bit better. But then the question will be like how much you want to switch over.
The through line that I keep seeing is that they keep trying to make stuff like 5e to keep people interested, but then they're changing it. I just don't see a big selling point in a lot of the stuff that they're changing. Like it's not different enough or player centric enough or DM centric enough to really feel like an edition shift. So I think there's a bit of behind the scenes confusion about what the next edition will be. So for the moment, and I think for the foreseeable future, I'm going to keep making stuff for 5e because I think that's where a lot of the audience is going to stay for a short time.
Makes sense.
Well, you'll probably know more in 2 weeks because of the summit, the designer summit or whatever they're calling it.
They didn't invite any designers to that.
It's
especially
true.
me.
I
started the open letter.
Actually, what is that? It's not even called
it's an influencer summit.
Influencer summit. I don't know whatever they call it.
Summit or something.
We don't need to stir up that vitriol. I know people were very angry about it, and understandably so. Just a reminder to anybody listening: don't target anyone at Wizards of the Coast or make anyone's personal
the influencers
day
who are going to
or the influencers who decided to go. This isn't like some sort of war you're in. It's a company who's doing things that are sometimes good and sometimes a bit annoying. But we don't, be kind.
Well, we'll still find out something.
Yeah,
although no creative people were invited, so that I can tell.
Mean, some of the influencers also are creators of various published content as well.
Not well.
It's more incidental.
Yeah. Not if they are. It's like they do like they add something. They do a guest spot, but they're not. That's not their full-time job.
They haven't reached out to third-party publishers like myself, Hit Point Press.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they did. I'm just saying some of the influencers also they'll have a magazine or they'll do some publications as well.
Well, actually, they did reach out to Morris from Ian World.
Oh,
that's good.
Okay,
I think he's actually the only one.
He's mostly press and news, but he definitely runs the publishing arm of with Level Up. So that's probably the most prominent third party publishing on that list. Not the most prominent influencer, but the most prominent in third party publishing.
It'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see what he has to say. Just because he's he has a lot of fingers and a lot of pots. So, and I know I think he's going off OGL with his products or trying to. So we'll be very curious to see how that goes. I only did 4 monsters, unlike you, Mark. So I'm not as fancy as you. I'm sorry, but
I don't think it makes you fancier to do more monsters.
You're
Steven. It
fancy.
just makes you a little
you're fancy.
more experienced in writing monsters. But you've looked through so many monsters for RPG Superstar that if you count the number that you've looked through, it's actually a significant percentage of the number that I have, having been in the industry for longer. So you've like been drinking from a fire hose of monsters, I would say.
Drinking from the fire hose. But I can give a real world example because I did this one pretty recently. So this was the Brengdi. And so Ron Lundeen asked me to do a water-based creature, and I don't know if he asked me to do it of legend of like, you know, but I looked, maybe he did. I have to look at the brief, but I was looking up creatures that were sea monsters, and I of course found 1,000, but every single one was done before. Literally every single one. So, but then I found this one where there's exactly one. I couldn't even find. There was like one page on the internet on this thing, and then I looked and I didn't see it anywhere else. And this is, I just linked the page that I found, and this is this Borengdi. It's a sea monster from Shetland waters. It chases boats, and then it wraps its long fins around them, and then drives the boat like down. And it can be deterred in two ways, with cold steel and amber beads. That's it. It's 2 paragraphs. That's everything about this creature that I could find. And a very cool picture. I actually love the picture. And I was enough. I was like, all right, I got enough here. I can figure this out. And when I made it, then I had to think about it because he gave me the CR, so it had to be like a CR 9 or 10 because it was for an actual adventure. So that often will happen, is that you're told like where to make the creature, and that's something else. Like I had to find a creature that was a sea monster that wasn't too powerful but too weak, you know, right in the middle. Good 9, 10th level creature. I actually really wish I could have made this like a 17th level creature, but I kind of did. I'll get to that in a second. So when I did it and I wrote it up, I changed it a bit because I wanted it to be, first of all, they don't go on a boat in this adventure, and they do go to the waterfront. So I made it and I gave it aquatic ambush and the ability to breathe air for like up to 10 minutes, so that, or up to an hour if its skin is wet. So this way you can find it during your adventure if you want it. So that's something that's always good, is that if you're going to make your creatures so limited, because in theory, did anything say that this thing like goes on land? No, it didn't. But you know, realistically, how often are your PCs going in the water? Not very frequently. And you want monsters, but I kind of like to have the best of both worlds.
It's an extremely good point, Stephen. Like the idea that your monsters need to be compatible with the way that people engage with the game. So a purely aquatic monster, like you're not going to have 3D underwater combat very often. Yeah. So you need to craft them around the locations that adventurers normally go, and the types of hooks that you'll normally engage with in a normal adventure.
But I did, and this is very important. So its main 2 paragraphs, and you can see what it looks like. It's this creature with these huge hook arms. Like it is known for capsizing boats. Like that's its thing. So you got to include that. So in here is capsize, and he tries to capsize a aquatic vessel. It just has to be adjacent to it, and its sides are smaller. It's kind of like a reverse Swallow Hole. And by the way, it has Swallow Hole because I love Swallow Hole. But you have to put in its most iconic feature. And so its most iconic feature was capsize and being able to grab on the ships. So that had to go in there. So, you know, when I did this, I'm just going through my checkpoints. It's like, okay, you made so it can go onto the land in small doses. It's usually going to be hanging around like ports and stuff. And we didn't give it. I might have given it a weakness to like cold steel or something, or I forgot. But we changed it to fire because why not? Fire's fine. We didn't have the amber, which would have been cool to get like the amber bead, but that's something that's so obscure and doesn't exist in the rules itself. So I couldn't do that. So we couldn't get that in there because it's just too rare. But the one thing I did want to add, which I liked, is I added the tug, which is I love this idea that they hang out at the docks and they are reverse fishermen. Is that they pull creatures that it says right here. Okay, the pulls a creature it can reach, or a creature holding something it can reach, such as a fishing line in the water, and it attempts an athletics check against the creature's fortitude and success. It pulls the creature into an adjacent space. At a critical, it can also make a jaw strike against it. So it basically is people are fishing, and then it pulls the fishing line and pulls them into the water, and then it eats them. So that was my big fun, because I always like to have a fun hook, because that's what people are going to remember.
Was that intentionally a pun?
No, but I'm very good at those. Get
I'm
it?
disappointed that you didn't go with the classic biblical "fishers of men" line.
Well, in the description it says here, let's see, they're more intelligent, particularly opportunists, blah, 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 blah. A fishing line often leads to a tasty meal. A brigand that spots a fishing lure might grab it gently with his claw to imitate a fish caught in a line. Once the fisherman is hooked and starts to reel in, the prangy plays along, slowly approaching the shore while making sluggish, struggling motions. Once near land, it violently tugs the lure to yank its unsuspecting prey into the water. Rah, 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 rah. So again, it's just I put all those in my monsters. It's like
that's extremely good.
I put a lot of. I always put something super memorable or something that you can latch onto as an adventure or a DM, or it's just something. You need something cool. It can't just be attack. It just can't be.
Can I ask you guys about a type of monster that I've been implementing recently, but is a little different? I've been using higher CR monsters that are basically NPCs as a way to introduce sort of big standalone individuals, as opposed to building everything as sort of a unique kind of a type or species of monster. Is that something you've done before?
What's the question?
So
unique creatures. There's only one of them in the world.
So sort of creating a monster around the idea of it being an NPC, that it's unique in some important way. Normally a higher CR, so it can serve as an individual encounter or as sort of you probably don't want to fight this quest giver. I've started to do this a little bit more, and I wonder where you guys stand with this, because it has interesting pros and cons when it comes to kind of design overheads.
Well, we have a whole bunch in the Battles of Bestiary. In Strange and Unusual, we have quite a few. And Battles of Bestiary... Are
you as conflicted about this as I am?
Not at all.
Well, I think that ours aren't quite all the way on the pendulum side in the direction that you went at the end of your description, of making them so that they aren't exactly useful for combat, and that their combat stats are probably unnecessary unless the PCs are like not biting your hook. So I can see why you would be conflicted about that. Ours tend to be ones that, while they're a unique individual and you might be able to talk with them, they're very dangerous and they will probably attack you.
Oh yeah, I've got certainly dangerous NPCs. Let me give you an example of one that's really interesting from the Book of Extinction. We have one tortoise in the book, the Pinta Island giant tortoise, which is known largely because of, if you guys don't know about tortoises in the Pacific, sailors would just kind of rock up, and especially around the Galapagos, just fill their ships with tortoises. At the time, they didn't think tortoises ate food. So weird. So they would just, bring them around, and it was a type of protein that they could stock up with, along the journey, so they're not eating hardtack all the time. And they grabbed a lot of tortoises. In the 70s, actually in the 60s, people realized, no, it was the 70s, that they spotted one of these tortoises on Pinta Island, and it was crazy because no one had seen them in decades. And this single tortoise lived until 2012. It was named Lonesome George. And so named because he didn't engage with the breeding program at all. Like, he just chose to not do that. And he died in captivity in 2012. So that's a long life for that tortoise. And he's just constantly, the speculation is that he's a big gay tortoise. So Lonesome George was such a huge figure in the conservation space, such an icon of like an endling, the last thing of its kind. And 7 foot tall, huge turtle. So we imagined Lonesome George in the book as this sort of timeless CR19 NPC monster that has just been around since the dawn of time. And it's just a mountain turtle, like turtle with a mountain on its back, just kind of slowly walking around the world. So we had a lot of time thinking about this character, and we even crafted like a fairly engaging, like legendary actions version of the monster stat block. But ultimately, I think he serves a purpose as a creature you consult, a creature you talk to. And that felt more correct for the purposes of this book, because ultimately Lonesome George is a sympathetic character in history. So it felt weird to create something deeply wrathful based on that.
Well, I actually do know Lonesome George. I know that whole story. I mean, so you can do it. I mean, ours are mean, are unique creatures. So then in Pathfinder, there's an actual tag called unique, and unique is that's it. That's the only one that exists in the entire multiverse. So that's it. And these are usually like demigods, or like my favorite is Smegvig, the paws monkey. This is like, the monkey's paw. Well, this is the paw the monkey came from, and it's looking for the paw, and it wants it back.
That's amazing.
That's a CR23 creature, and this thing is nasty. And it's always looking for the paw. So, so what you do with a peaceful creature, I mean, you can interject, Mark, is...
those are tough, whether they're unique or not.
Yeah.
They're tough to get right, and they're tough to make people value them in a monster book. So what I do is I try to do them sparingly, just to show some variation, and try to make sure that there is a built-in encounter centered around that creature that does use the abilities that are printed in it, and not just like, we talked to this friendly turtle, and it has like hundreds of words of special abilities that it didn't use in that encounter when we talked to it. And I'm not sure one way or the other, because I haven't seen Lonesome George to know how that would work. But like, for example, we have an atoning spirit, which is essentially maybe one of the spirits from like Christmas Carol, who comes and shows up to someone, and they will be able to just appear near you, and only you can see them, and they'll show you these weird visions of like alternate possibilities and try to get you to repent your evil ways.
I just want to say that that's a wonderful idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was an RPG Superstar entry for the Strange and Unusual book. And so it's got a variety of special abilities that are all themed around that. So at the point where you used it, it's going to use all of those abilities. And if the person who it's trying to reform is not Scrooge, but is like Attila the Hun and attacks it, it does have some combat abilities so that it can fight back, although not really a lot of those. And so
a mix of features that are social or perhaps divination based, that are magical in nature, and then additional features that allow it to survive in combat in case people engage with it at that level.
Right. But most of its word count is on the sort of social and sort of the encounter that you would expect to have with it, whereas the statistics that let it engage at that level are more or less just like, they're mostly basic attacks and immunities that you would expect it to have, plus like the ability to go invisible is useful in a lot of different contexts. So I would say that if you want to have a creature that's probably going to be encountered in a way where you're not fighting it, because that's what the story of the creature is, then its special abilities maybe should also be focused on that. And it might not be a super high level or challenge rating creature. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just something that's very important to the story. There's a unique creature that was in Pathfinder Second Edition, not in one of our books, but just overall in one of the books. I'm blanking on its name, but it is a real world legendary creature that's like good aligned and that like appears when people are in need to help them out. And it's super high level, unique, friendly creature. And it has abilities to let it do that. And that's sort of like can be a GM Deus Ex Machina plot device potentially.
Well, so this is how I would handle it. I would have it do a couple things. First of all, I would have it have abilities, and these can be custom. They don't have to even be spells that gets it out of trouble. So like if it's attacked, like have an ability, it can gate or teleport people away, and it's just like, it's very non-combative and it's also incredibly annoying, and it's for PCs and they're like, I attack it. It's like, it uses its ability. You are now 10 miles away. Good luck. It's like, that's the first thing. It said you can really negate people, and that's like in fiction, you see that a lot. Like, I'm trying to think of like, in the Matrix, they had that. I forgot his name. The guy who ran the nightclub. Like, he was protected by all these people, and he didn't fight. But then he could just gate you away to somewhere else, like through doors, so you were never near him. I like to think of these also as like a carrier group in real world, an aircraft carrier group. Aircrafts carriers are billions of dollars, but they actually can't defend themselves. They have no way to defend themselves. They're very powerful, but very weak. So they have what's called a carrier group, which is they have about 17 ships that escort every carrier, and they could defend themselves. And
so in a villainous sense, you want them to have lieutenants and minions.
They have even the ability to summon them, and these can literally be, in the case of Lonesome George, people who are always on standby to defend Lonesome George. And
that's
if
a really good idea. I might add that into the book. That's
okay,
really
so
cool.
if something happens, these people literally are called subconsciously and teleport in, and now you're fighting them. And these guys ain't fooling around. And you now are fighting like 6, whatever, CR. Like, oh, I'm fighting a CR-19, I'll kill him. Oh, now you're fighting 6 CR-19 guys, and these guys have nothing but deadly abilities. It's like, and then Lonesome George, you can give him tons of defensive abilities to negate damage or to phase out of reality, and suddenly you're not even fighting him. It's impossible. That's how I would do it. It's just that either he has capabilities to mess people up, or, and I actually like the second one more, is that he has protectors. You've heard of that. There's like the rhino protectors in Africa, the guys who are always protecting rhinos from poachers. It's the same thing. It's like these, but in this way, you do it in a magic way. So there's like, Lonesome George has his volunteers who are always protecting him because he's helped them out in some way in the past. And now these are people who are, and it's also cool for the lore. It's like, oh, these are people who have, dedicated their time and effort to help defend anyone who would dare harm him. And if you do, then you're gonna have to face them, and then they all appear, and then you're like, oh my god, we're in a lot of trouble now. So
yeah, Labib Sood in the chat's the same as ants and bees protecting the queen, and I think that's a really good analogy for that.
Yeah. And that's right. There's just that's what I was thinking. Think in nature, not that a carrier hunter group is a nature, but it is a very fascinating similarity. Is that you have a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier, which is big, slow, and powerful, but has no defenses. So the only way it can defend itself is by having 17 smaller, very powerful ships defending it at all times. Same thing as you said with queens. It's like a queen has no defenses at all. So they have literally warrior bees that defend them. Like, that's what they do. So there you go. Use nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can have an entry that really plays up your unique creature. I think a good example, if you want to look at how to take a unique creature and do what I think is one of the best takes on unique creatures, is Lost Omens Monsters of Myth for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's got rules in it, but it also has a lot of lore, so it could be a good read even for someone who doesn't play Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But each unique monster has like a significant backstory and a lot of other elements talking about what's going on with them. They sometimes have a subsidiary monster that's in there that's like, this is the spawn of that monster, or this is someone who has like had their mind overwhelmed by that monster. And sometimes like spells or items that are related to that monster, and like legends passed down from the locals about that monster and other things like that. So the monster went up in a like 6-page entry to talk about this monster and how you can use it with plot hooks and campaign ideas too.
And it's funny, now we hit a nerve because we have like Hornets. Yeah, that's how Hornets, that's how bees take out Hornets. Bees who have, yes, they can sting them, but what they do is they go around them and they flutter.
Overheat them.
They overheat them, right? They literally cook them to death. They like flutter their wings and vibrate and grapple them and then kill them by heating them up, and they die. And then someone else said the scariest part of an elder brain, which by the way, that's very similar, is that then I love the whole mythos of elder brain and mind flayers. I know it really well. Elder brains have 10 elite mind flayers who defend elder brain, because the elder brain has no defenses, literally, and they also have like drow, and they also have other people they control, so they always have a huge staff to defend the main pacifist person. And this way you could also have it that they can go up and talk to them. You could also do the other way, which is the gold dragon way, which they're nice, but they can defend themselves too.
And they have very strong alliances and allegiances and stuff like that, which kind of force them into conflict with you.
Yeah, like gold dragons you can chat with.
Can I tell you a little bit about some of the dragons I'm writing for the Book of Extinction?
Sure.
So in our chapter of reduxed, like reimagined monsters, we included dragons that are not aligned with metal or colors or gemstones, but wood. So we created an oak dragon, a bamboo dragon, a cherry tree dragon, and a pine dragon. And then did, of course, a couple of, life stages for each one. Seedling, sapling, adult, as opposed to wormling, young adult. We had an extremely good time trying to find ways to make some of those dragons, which are, we made them because trees are really tall. We made these more like serpentine dragons. So of course the bamboo dragon is going to be heavily inspired by traditional Chinese dragons, which is a really fun way to, approach these in a way that like, traditional D&D doesn't represent. But now we've suddenly got a good dragon on our hands, and we need to find a way to kind of, a fundamentally good dragon. And we need to find a way to bring that to blows with players if they want to engage with this in an adventure sense without playing evil characters. So it's very protective of its kingdom, and it doesn't like interlopers, because it wants to kind of foster the people in its realm as kind of its horde. If like these people, flourish and prosper, it's happy. So adventuring interlopers are sort of a no-no. It doesn't like them because adventurers tend to mess things up and get things killed.
Well, we know a lot about dragons, to say the least.
we have plantish dragons too, or at least a fungus dragon that is part of a family that we haven't done the other dragons for, that Ginny D came up with on ours.
She's wonderful. Show me those fungus dragons later. I'm so excited to read that.
Oh yeah,
Toadstool dragons. Yeah, they're in our dragon book.
Toadstool dragons, and they're cooks. They're chefs. That's what they are. They actually, and then they use like the fungus on their bodies and as like seasoning. They
love to cook.
Yes.
And even though the things they like to eat are sometimes decaying matter, but they do know that other people don't like decaying matter, and they have a wide palate so they can avoid the things that they know that other people don't like to eat.
Two people in the chat independently brought up bonsai dragons, and now I'm so annoyed that they're not in the book. I may end up writing them. That is such a great idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so evocative. Like immediately I can see that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a template for your tree dragons where they stay small but increase in power, so they have like the size of one of the like sapling or smaller dragons, but gain some of the powers of the later dragons. So it could be like a sidebar that you could still fit in.
It could be where
bonsai dragons maintain their small size, but otherwise use the statistics for
I am doing a couple sidebars in there to like kind of branch those dragons off because like I wasn't gonna write ancient
branch
versions
them off.
I wasn't gonna write ancient versions of them because I was like, well, like mechanically not a lot in 5e. The ancient dragons aren't doing a lot that's super interesting. It's just more layer stuff. So okay, all of these are tree dragons. They get a forest layer. Have fun. Here's how you modify the stats to kind of go forward and make them a higher CR. And plus, so few people will fight a CR 20 plus dragon. I didn't feel like they needed those individual stat blocks for this section. So because we're already getting to 18-19 without that. So yeah, that's actually a really interesting idea that we could create bonsai dragons or just much smaller dragons using a sidebar. I love that. That's really, really cool.
So
that's the kind of design you want to look for when you want to elegantly express the mechanic without needing to put a whole bunch of different stuff in there.
Yeah, if it needs to be one feature, you don't need to build a whole new stat block if it's just one feature in a normal thing, right? Unless it's really subverting the kind of core idea of what that thing is and what it's doing in a way that like has a domino effect. Cool, sidebars, great. I mean, it's a really, really direct way of doing that, and it gives you a lot more utility when you're being a storyteller and you want to use this in a different way. The D&D monster manual has some great examples of that with like hags, and actually dragons have, dragons as innate spellcasters as a sidebar in there. These are really, really massively useful things that people should do more with their monsters.
So seven
and
deadly,
you get there from the lore.
Seven Deadly Twins said, have you guys seen the board game Flamecraft? There's so many different types of dragons. I actually know that game. I've not played it, but it is very, very, very cute. And there's a lot of dragons in that game. It's very popular. I've not played it yet, though. If you haven't seen that one, you should take a look at that too. By the way, Mark, it's very cute. It's done in a very Eldamon Pokemon type style, and you play little dragons, and the dragons cook food. It's like
Coastal Dragons would like to play that game.
Yeah, it's really funny. And you see them, they're actually all the artwork is them like literally. The funniest one is like the red dragon like cooking food on the fire, and he's in the fire because he's a red dragon, so it doesn't bother him. So he's like he's just like hanging out there cooking. So I've heard this game is great. There's like some dragons that there are leaf dragons in here, and I see them. The leaf dragons are selling produce and hanging out in the floral shop. So,
although, so to diverge from dragons a little bit, I want to mention, and back to the idea of unique monsters, I want to mention a weird, interesting thing we're doing with the adventure that we're selling alongside the Book of Extinction. This is a little away from monster design, but I'll try to loop it back in. The adventure is called The Last Owlbear. And it is about a near future in a fantasy setting in which owlbears were hunted to extinction. And someone finds, like much like Lonesome George, someone finds one more. And your goal is to find that big mother owlbear that's been increased in CR to like CR 5 for like a level 5 party. Catch it, travel overland while hunters are trying to like get past you and kill the owlbear and get it to an alchemist who's going to try some sort of breeding program. So I think we're kind of merging this idea of like reusing classic monsters and finding unique monsters and just build an entire adventure around that one concept, right?
Can't you just use a wish spell and wish it back? Or is that cheating?
I'm implementing some weird mechanics when it comes to monster extinction and race extinction in D&D.
Okay.
The last one dies, their souls are cut off from the world, and you can't resurrect them. And the reason I'm doing that in such a hard mechanical way is because in the real world, you end up with something called a dead clade walking. Like, if we could, right now, bring back the passenger pigeon using mad science, like we're getting closer and closer every year to doing that, it doesn't matter. This passenger pigeon doesn't work without the enormous forest that they used to nest in. It doesn't work without their food sources and the ecology that they used to exist in. If you bring back the mammoth today and you release it into the wild, even with 10, 20 mammoths, they're going to die out because the food chain that supported them and the environments that supported them are no longer in existence. So you can have a number of creatures that exist in a way that will never allow them to escape the gravitational pull of extinction. So resurrect them if you want, and we talk about that a little in the book, but I didn't want to,
So if you resurrect them, they're zombies. They're just you resurrect them, but they're just undead. That's all.
Well, I mean, even if you make them alive, like there's nothing they can do to flourish again. The things that drive something extinct are forces. It's not individual events. It's these big things that push and pull against a species that drives it into the grave. So you can bring back a couple of them with magic, but ultimately, I mean, even in the real world, that doesn't matter. Like I want to tell you briefly one quick story about the Pyrenean ibex. It's the only animal that has gone extinct twice. A team of international scientists, got DNA taken from a sample of this mountain goat's ear, really beautiful horns, and they cloned it in a lab. And the clone lasted about 5 minutes and then died. It's really, really hard to do that. But, there was never a situation in which they could use that cloning technology to really like fix the species. Mad science and magic, like, don't fix these problems as much as we love them to, right? It'd be so great if there was an easy answer where we just clone more mammoths. But I mean, you'd be cloning them all the time and you release them into the wild and they just wouldn't reproduce into the numbers that you need them to. It's just the sad kind of reality of it. I mean, our book is kind of about grappling with those realities and talking about actual solutions. Like, maybe don't let things go extinct in the first place.
So, Helpful Drow said, any tips you'd recommend when crafting or creating a boss monster that can last 5 or more rounds? Well, you see, I hear this. So this is the number one complaint I hear about with D&D fights, is that they only go like 2 or 3 rounds. If you watch any of our 500 episodes of our Actual Play podcast and Roll for Combat, I've had fights that go 30 rounds. It's like, I don't seem to ever have this problem. Maybe I'm just really tough or something, but we average...
Well, there's a difference between 5e and PF2.
I know. That's the thing. I think part of it is I was going to get to that, is that I think part of it is the game mechanic itself. And I think I don't know, because the few times I played 5e, the fights go fast too, and I think that's part of the game.
It is part of the game. Yeah. Otherwise, people, it depends on your group. Like, if you want longer, and we're talking 5e, if you want combats that go longer in 5e, you want to increase the health pool and actually decrease the damage. The thing I normally do is I quickly take a look at how much HP is around all of the players, sum it up, and then figure, like, all right, I want it to last 7 rounds, so let me divide down the HP, the damage output, so it divides this by 7. And then figure out, you can use pretty rough approximations to figure out how much damage the players are going to do and scale up the HP accordingly. It doesn't really have to align with anything. You can sort of fudge these numbers just before the combat. The DMG has some good rough guidelines on how much damage players should be, a monster should be dealing given rounds and stuff like that you can use to kind of give yourself a starting point. But yeah, the answer is, figure out the numbers they have to be and fudge it. Like, the total damage output is not going to vary too much round to round for monsters or players. And you can kind of assume that everyone hits all the time, because the misses should be consistent between the monster and the players when you're doing these sorts of rough estimates. So you can make rough estimates that kind of work this out and create big encounters. Though I will say, the variance is such that if you make these combats that last a long time, you'll deplete so many player resources that it has to be a boss fight. Because in 5e, they'll be so desperate for resources, so desperate for spell slots, that you're going to have players that will not be able to go through 2 encounters of that sort of length without a short or long rest between them.
So I'm looking here.
So I've definitely heard that kind of advice before, and I do want to somewhat caution against it as an overall strategy, unless you are looking even deeper into the game mechanics than just hit points, because otherwise you are making incapacitating one-shot kill effects even more powerful than they already are.
Yeah, you need legendary resistances built in as well, so they can shrug that sort of stuff off.
You're gonna have to give them legendary resistances in D&D or something else in Pathfinder.
Be cautious of legendary actions. Those increase the damage output so much, you're actually shortening the combat even more. Other things you can do are like high HP minions that keep the players away to extend the combat a little bit more. But this is like don't do this all the time. Do this as fun one-offs. This can't be your standard within the system of 5e. It's important to remember that our systems create constraints for the way that we engage with them and the way we tell our stories.
But even differing systems, I think the solutions wind up sometimes converging.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
if
yeah.
the game is similar enough.
Pathfinder and D&D are close enough that we're going to find ourselves agreeing more often than not about these broad kind of tricks.
The broad stuff.
I would say that the minion idea that you brought up there is what I was going to suggest, rather than giving the boss just more hit points and lowering their damage output. Mainly because the 5e DMG instructions for monsters, which seems like is not what Wizards actually uses.
No, they're pretty bad.
Really, really focused on how much damage the monster deals in a way that is like way putting the cart before the horse, because it'll do things like consider like, oh, fireball does this much damage at level 3 and hold person takes someone out of the fight. Therefore, taking someone out of the fight is only worth as much damage as a level 3 fireball in the monster. And no, taking someone out of the fight is way more valuable at higher levels than that.
Yeah, and there's subtleties that system doesn't capture. Like if you drop a player or a couple of players early in the combat, then there's a very different dynamic in terms of the damage output and the damage that the players can then sustain for the rest of combat. As always, the big thing about D&D, there is a DM there to tip those balances in such a way that they maximize the enjoyment for players. So, I mean, the real trick here is cheat. Like, be a DM. People are going to, have massively different opinions on this. But when I DM, I fudge HP numbers a lot in order to make sure that I get long enough encounters that I can kind of heighten that tension. And that's not everyone's going to agree with that. Some people hate
Steven
fudging
is the
HP
opposite
numbers.
side on that. I know. I'm more towards Steven's side.
I don't fudge, but I also have I have a lot more experience though than most people. I can do this. Like, I know exactly how far and to push players, and that's something else. I think fudging is fine, and eventually, it's like DMing hard mode is how do you set up a monster and encounter just tough enough that everyone drops but no one dies, and that it goes really long. That's the
holy grail, right? And sometimes you misjudge it and you go, well, I was actually using the maximum HP for this monster.
Yeah. But if you play, I mean, you will get to that. I think. If you're good, if you play enough.
For some players, it's not the holy grail, and that becomes an issue in its own right. Where some players are just like, they want to steamroll.
Oh, no.
Once you have gotten something that's intense fight, they actually are not having fun in that that situation.
Do what I do. So I give them lots of baby fights where they just steamroll and they feel like heroes. And then the two ways I do it. So my record, I have, if you listen to the podcast, we have a lot of fights that go 2 episodes, which is actually 2 sessions. We actually have fights that go 2 sessions. I will every so often have one that goes 3 sessions, but my record is 2 months. It's 1 fight, 8 sessions, 2 months. That's the finale of Dead Sons, which is gargantuan. Wow. Yeah, it's so good. It's the best fight we ever did, and it was awesome. You do waves. I do waves a lot. Waves is the best because you can then also tempo the battle. You can I usually start off like not that hard, but hard enough. And then you have maybe easy guys, and then you have big lieutenants come in, and then maybe some other guys, and then the boss comes in. And by then, first of all, you're going a lot of rounds, and then people are really like, the battlefield has changed. People are wounded. People are a little beat up, and suddenly it's a really exciting combat. So I always do waves for very complex boss fights, and Mark knows this because we have this in Jewel the Indigo Isle. We have phases, and I'm a big person on phases, just like video games. You have at least 3. You can't have don't do 2. You always have to at least 3, and then the monsters will literally change.
I think this is also a good. I mean, this is good shorthand for adventure writing in general.
Yeah.
That you have to remember that what you're telling is a story, and stories need a beginning, and middle, and an end.
Yes.
So your combat encounters, if you're designing them so that they mechanically flow like that, I often don't actually change my monster mechanics as the fight goes on, but I change the environment around the players. That potentially the monster will be knocking over walls, or
we do that too. Yeah.
So there's more than one way to kind of craft that experience, but if you want something to last for a while, you can transform the environment, you can transform the monster, and bring in allies and disable people in ways that are really interesting in order to kind of both lengthen it out and also create this like building of tension until the thing drops and there's that release.
Now we're talking waves, phases, minions, environments, and secondary goals like saving hostages.
Oh yeah, secondary goals. I forgot about that one.
About to get hit by a fire that's spreading or something like that. That is how, in my opinion, rather than adding hit points and lowering the damage or whatever you're going to tweak, that is how you make an encounter that's longer, that's impactful. And that means you don't have to throw a harder monster. So you kind of are lowering the damage because instead of throwing a harder monster that does more damage, you're throwing more minions, you're throwing more waves, you're having in the environment, you're adding a new phase where things change, you're adding extra action syncs like saving those hostages that the PCs will do ideally instead of focusing everything on the boss and taking it out. And that'll make things take a little longer.
By the way, the helpful drought's like 2 episodes. Holy moly. Please, 2 episodes is constant.
That's so tight. I'm tired thinking about that.
Oh,
like,
dude.
I think it depends on your crew, right? Like,
dude,
this is very
2
much
months.
like, who do you game with normally,
2
right?
months.
How do you game? And I think those. I think if you look at the kind of full breadth of role players, you're going to see very different camps when it comes to this. And I think 5e is catering to people who want their combats to be swift and deadly, in and out. And I think actually the resources that the game is kind of built around completely clash with that. Like, there are some problems in the way that core system is set up.
Interesting.
But I think that's okay. Like, it's not critically the end of the world that D&D caters towards fast combats but gives people resources for.
That's fascinating. As the person who co-wrote Pathfinder, Mark, I find that my games, especially now we're at higher levels, people like to use their abilities in cool ways because their characters have so many abilities that they don't even care if they do damage. They just got to use their ability in a cool way and got to see it used. And maybe they hit the monster. They're like, cool, it worked. Like, you did 2 points of damage. I don't care. I got to use my ability. I got to
do my cool thing.
Yeah, I see that all the time.
Well, how is that related to the fact that I'm one of the co-creators? Or are you saying you're telling it to me because was that part of the design ethic? But so we did want people to be able to use cool abilities. I was kind of expecting myself that a lot of Pathfinder counters would be like 3 to 5 rounds on average, but not like 2 to 3. 3 would be like,
that's terrible.
Fight, or you got lucky, or you got the drop on them and do just the right thing. Whereas 4 would be pretty typical. Maybe 5, and honestly, some of those 5s could be like, it's basically over at 5, but maybe there's like something to mop up on the 6th round and nobody cares. That's what I'm expecting a typical Pathfinder 2 fight to look like, and that's where a lot of the mathematical modeling went. And the thing that I'm very proud of in Pathfinder 2 is that they do take about that long, and people are saying that the monsters are about as hard as we say they are. And the encounters are about as deadly as the encounter building system says. So that GMs can build that. And whereas it is true in D&D 5e, if an encounter says deadly, it's usually pretty easy and you just win it anyway. And if it's like deadly plus, then it may still be very easy.
A big part of crafting supplements like the Book of Extinction is that I'm creating monsters that are a little more true to how players expect them to be, as opposed to the exact system that 5e says that they should be in terms of power balance. Because for good or for ill, most players think that if you have a level 4 party, that a level 4 monster should be pretty dangerous in and of itself. Like, it should be a good encounter. So we actually kind of make numbers move in the direction of where they feel better sometimes, just in terms of like yeah, the monsters in the monster manual sometimes have HP that's way too low. Let's buff that up a little bit. And as long as we keep to the like CR modeling, but you can kind of make choices about how much damage it's going out per round and how much HP a thing has in order to make things feel good and last an amount of time that is appropriate for players of that level.
Yeah, the problem with 5e is that very high level monsters can still have like a 19 armor class, and they moderated it by giving big hit point pools. But it just, I mean, this is a whole other subject.
I think there's an assumption in the mechanics that you're supposed to kind of spread out those hit point pools amongst features that provide damage mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think. If I have one problem in 5e, it's the way the monsters are designed, and they're sort of improving as time goes on.
It's only
they don't even design them in the way
that's
that
only
it says
like
there.
The second most important thing in a role playing game. So that's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, but simultaneously, it's a game. It's moderated by a DM, and it's at least it's broadly on a curve. It's not fundamentally random. It's just kind of off where you want them to be.
I know, but I was
as a DM or as a third. Yeah.
I feel like if you're the game designer, and I put my money where my mouth was by making a monster creation system that's the same one that Paizo uses, and that takes you through the steps, and that will make you a functional monster that meets all of the expectations and needs. But I feel like if you're a game designer, and the GM is supposed to be running this game, they're supposed to be figuring things out, but I don't want them to have to second guessing whether the monster creation rules I gave them are even going to work in the first place. That's just way more added stress and work and game design work that I should have done and not the players. And I do feel like
I 100%. It's an absolute flaw in the system. And the nice thing about it is
a flaw in the system of the game. I think Wizards has their own method that works.
I
just think the one in the Dungeon Master that works at least somewhat. In the one in the Dungeon Master's Guide, though, oh my gosh, like
it's completely busted. Yeah,
it'll just you could just make a creature that has Meteor Swarm or something like that, and then has bad AC and pretty low hit points, and it'll tell you it's like level 9.
The Archmage is a really good example of this, and there's a lot of monsters like this.
Close to, that's the weirdest thing, because they actually built that monster. I was like, maybe when I first read that, I was the system for building monsters was before I read the monsters. I was like, maybe I'm just being weird and making an edge case creature, and that's not something they would ever want you to make. And the idea is just don't do it. But then they actually do have some monsters that are like that, and it's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I completely agree. It's it's super interesting to see this sort of play out as you kind of make stuff for third party content. You can kind of craft stuff that has really interesting damage mitigation techniques that still accomplishes that without just relying on big HP pools or something like that.
Well,
and I think that's the real joy and the real challenge of making stuff as a third party creator. I get to find ways to like make this system sing, even if the designers have like their own way of doing it. We can kind of improve upon that.
I'm going to talk. So I was going to say is that I think with D&D, it is very much the power fantasy and the superhero. Like whenever I play D&D, everyone I'm always with, they're just destroying everything in sight. And then when you play Pathfinder, they're like, wait a second, I didn't kill it? I'm like, no, in fact, you didn't even hit it.
Pathfinder first is even more extreme.
Oh, I completely agree, which is, I never said, Pathfinder first, you're 100% right. Pathfinder first, the power creep got out of control, and also it just was
in the core, but yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of power creep in that game, and it was just like very easy. And then it was also assumed that you had certain magic items at certain points and stuff like that. But then, I mean, this with the Pathfinder second, like you could only get your AC up so high. You can only do so much damage. Like there's these invisible soft caps.
I know.
You invented it, but I'm just saying to the audience, it's like there's these caps, and because of those caps, people feel like I can't get past that. I'm like, right. That's where teamwork comes in. If you help each other, you can get past those invisible caps, but you can't do it on your own. And that is what makes Pathfinder so much fun, is that you have to play as a group. And if you want a combat to go more than 2 or 3 rounds, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, just look at my favorite friend, Swallow Whole. That will do it for you, because once you take someone out of combat, Whoops, my TV turned itself on for some magic reason. That's weird. Turn itself off. Is that you just bring in Swallow Hole and you bring someone out of combat, well, things start to get pretty dicey. Or bring two people out of combat, which I've done more than once, and suddenly things get really dicey because there's only two people actively fighting and two people inside the monster. So
you actually swallowed people who couldn't attack inside the monster, like the ones with big, bulky two-handed weapons. Whenever I swallow someone, they always just kill me from my stomach.
No, these are monks, so they don't even have slashing.
The monks
I had to
should
write
be able
new
to deal
rules.
a ton of damage. They can't escape.
They can't escape. They can't escape. You're right. So, but they'll
my
die.
monster's flat-footed to them as they just
Yeah, I
punch
know,
my
but they
stomach
do.
over and
I
over.
know, but they took like 70 points of acid damage every turn of bludgeoning, and they were going to die in like 2 rounds. So what I do is that's one of my only home rules is that I did make the rupture. I like added 5 or 10 to the rupture value, but they using their bludgeoning so they can at least get out. Otherwise, they're like screwed. So I do have that.
To accomplish something similar, taking someone out of the combat and putting the players at a weird back foot. In the past, I've implemented. If I ever have a spellcaster, there's a bit of a dominate effect right off the bat, especially if they can get the drop, because that puts the players on, and it's not something that lasts forever, but it's a big shift in power dynamics, and that's always extremely fun for me.
So
the more that the system is like unbalanced in how you can build your PCs, the more powerful dominate and effects that make the PCs attack the other PCs are. Especially if you are overweighted on offense compared to defense in the system. Pathfinder First also had a similar situation where you would just go through adventures with this busted team that would kill everything, and then the gunslinger gets dominated and kills 3 characters on her turn.
Yeah, it's one of these things that has this. It's almost like a meta commentary between the DM and the monster and the players. Like, I'm going to steal your agency from you. This one thing that makes this game beautiful to you, I'm taking that away and I'm using it to harm everybody else in a way that forces you to make difficult decisions. And I find that that's like a really beautiful thing. I mean, it accomplishes very much the same thing that Swallow Hole does, right? It takes somebody out of the fight, but I think it also has this layer of like, haha, I'm sort of hurting the kind of idea of a role-playing game underneath your feet, just to see kind of how you react to that. And they never last too long. They're not indefinite, so that's kind of the silver lining to that sort of thing.
Swallow Hole, I think these are big monsters. The first thing they're going to do is that I have my 2 favorites, Swallow Hole and Trample. Like, so you see something big, you better get the hell out of there. Or if you're going to go up toe to toe, you better get some defenses, man, because you're fighting something, especially these guys are at 14th level and they're fighting pretty big things. It's like you're fighting something the size of a house. You better be prepared for some pain, man. It's gonna hurt.
I just saw Tiger Eyes in the chat asked what's Mike's background. So I'll go ahead and repeat that for their benefit. I am a designer for D&D, or I make D&D 5th edition products. I run Mage Hand Press. I've created a book called Dark Matter, which is a sci-fi conversion for D&D, Valda's Spire of Secrets, which is a big 5e expansion, and I currently have a Kickstarter running for the Book of Extinction, which takes extinct animals and tells you their real stories and then converts them into monsters for D&D 5e. It's a super unique book because very few D&D products are going to teach you about conservation and biology and that sort of stuff.
Well, ours teach you how to be a dragon. That's what we do.
That's also valuable. I think there's, I've done like straight up and down, supplements for so long. I really wanted to do one thing that just had like the ability to engage the real world a little differently. And I'm really proud of what we came up with. And the Kickstarter's doing well. So if that seems at all like something you're interested in, go to deadmonstermanual.com to support it. That'll just link you to the Kickstarter. I'm so proud of that URL, guys.
That's a cool URL. I have to admit.
I'm very proud of deadmonstermanual.com.
It's easy to remember, too.
Yeah, but it's so depressing.
But they're dead, Steven.
It's a Dead Monster Manual.
The world.
Good.
I guess so. Let's see. Do we have any other general questions? They shouldn't be suffocating inside the monsters. Oh, they suffocate. That never happens. I've actually never had that happen. They always get out by then. or at
Even
those
if
levels.
you don't have a way to rupture from the inside, if you kill it, then you can escape
You pop
from
out.
the monster.
You pop
You can
out.
also, in theory, although I've rarely had players do this because they're usually just like, whatever, I'll tank the acid damage. It can't attack me with its other attacks, and I'll just attack from the inside. But they can roll like an escape to just crawl out its mouth.
That's very hard.
It's generally difficult, and not only that, but sometimes it's not that dangerous to be inside, especially if you're like a kind of character that can do some self-healing. Usually you can last for long enough that the fight ends. Not if you're in one of Steven's 30-round fights, though. You're dead.
Oh my
in that
god.
fight.
That's yeah. Yeah.
The real bad luck is when it's like a sandworm and it just burrows underground after it.
I didn't get it. You know what? I can do that because I had a sea monster fight recently, and there's 2 sea monsters, and they swallowed whole. And I'm like, I can be a real dick and just like goodbye, and then that creature's dead forever. But you can't do that. It's a story, but it's like I always think about that. I'm like, I could end this fight and just kill this character forever. There's no way they're coming back from that. So,
Seven Deadly Twins asked, "Do we have a Pathfinder version?" Not yet. I'll be pestering Steven behind the scenes to talk to him about doing some Pathfinder conversions if we hit a good enough number on the Kickstarter. It's not an official stretch goal yet, but I only have stretch goals planned up to $100,000. If we do better than that, we'll start looking into digital supplements for a Pathfinder version. Whether it's with you guys or someone else, it's on the list of things that I'd love to do if this thing is successful enough, and I hope it will be. I think we have a book that can do really cool things in the world, and that can teach people about, conservation. I mean, teach kids about conservation, really.
Yeah, we sell a lot of Pathfinder product. I don't know if it's more. It's like right. It's about 50-50. It depends. Sometimes it's 40-60, but
which a lot of people who sell both sell way more of D&D. So that puts us in a spot where
well, there's a reason why we're in
a spot that's higher.
Well, there's a reason why we're the largest third-party publisher for Pathfinder.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, when you're the largest,
or is that literally because we are,
chicken and egg? But we sell a lot of PF2 stuff.
I see another question in here, which is, how would you recommend building spellcaster monsters quickly? They're a chore in any edition. So let's assume from that means that you did not want to follow my advice, which is not to build spellcaster monsters. So I generally think spellcaster monsters are kind of a drag to build. They are a drag for the GM because you have like 30 spells and you have to look them all up, and then you have to decide which of them you're going to cast every single battle. And like Mike said before, the GM might have 4 of them in the fight. And then what are they going to do? You have to think about different fight compositions. So my recommendation is just don't. But if you do, one way you can do it is look at some other spellcaster monsters, pour through a list of spells, and consider whether or not that spell is actually useful in a fight if it's not the monster's highest level slot. Find it some utility, just like you might do with a player character. So if it's like a high level monster and you must give it first level spells, find something that'll be of some use. Also consider not being like a PC and just being like, oh, this is a 17th level monster. Maybe it only has 9th, 8th, and 7th level spells, and I'm not going to bother with that.
That's exactly what I was going to recommend. You're not going to use the monster's full breadth of spells. So I would just plan ahead of time. Like I would go give it a spell attack that is not using spell slots, just a big magical effect that it can use with its action if you don't want to plan out a cool spell to look up this turn. So give it like a default thing that does AoE damage and good damage and targets a save that maybe the players are weakish to. Give it and just like one big damaging mitigating spell like a black tentacles or something that slows the players down, and then give it a big either individual target or big AoE zapping spell, because you're not going to burn through. Typically spellcasters don't have a ton of HP, and if you're dealing a lot of damage with your spells, You don't want them to last a huge amount of time. This is truer in 5e than it is in Pathfinder, for what I'm learning. But you don't have to fully plan out the whole spell list. They're never going to get their first level and second level spells out if they have 7th and 8th level spells. And I would literally plan round by round an optimal routine, and then give yourself the ability to switch those up and call that the day. Like, if you want to get in and out fast, one big disabling spell, one big damage spell, and then a backdrop that they can use, round by round without burning spell slots, so you don't have to worry about it. And that can be as easy as, kind of a ranged beam attack that deals some force damage. Who cares? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't actually have to be spells 100% of the time. If you kind of say, well, this is a spell, it can be counterspelled. It's like you kind of give them like high level cantrips, essentially.
So, by the way, I kind of disagree with Mark. I do like when spells are with monsters, but I run all my games online, and I always have PFEZ or Nephis, and I always have my monsters up so I can click and see what the spell does. Second, I use
okay if you have a couple.
Well, I have VTTs, and I have the spells pre-programmed, so I just press a button.
Like 2 spells on a monster, that's fine.
Well,
I'm talking
what
about
I was going to get at
monsters.
is that, and this is the first thing I know, the biggest change that happened with Pathfinder 2nd Edition was that you did not have all the spells on the monsters, and like that is very common now. So Muted Delver from Battles of Bestiary, I'm looking creature. It's 11th level creature. And they have spells. They have 6th level spells, and they have 5th level spells, and that's it. They don't have 4th. They don't have 3rd. They're not even listed out. I mean, do they have them? Probably, but they're not even listed out because you're never going to use them.
I think they're innate spells, right?
They're innate spells.
Caster.
Right, they're innate spells. But the point is,
so they don't have the lower level spells.
Okay, they don't have the lower level spells, but I've seen it where they don't even list out every single spell on the monsters. Is that only prepared to get every single spell?
Only prepared and spontaneous have to get them all, only because fans in the playtest really wanted it to look like that.
That's incredibly rare.
Yeah, they're very annoying, and those are the exact kind of monsters that Rao Riva, Helpful Drow, wanted to have advice on making.
Well, like Living Library,
they're very rare.
Has that. They're prepared. But even their first level and second, they're actually pretty good. They got mirror image. That's always useful.
Yeah, they look for utility.
Color spray
for the slot.
That's good. Raven Feeblement, Fleet Spell. These are good spells.
The interesting thing I think a lot of listeners will want to keep in mind is that there's a big difference between Mark and Steven and I and the way you can run your own monsters, because you don't have to have a fully written publishable stat block for your home game. If you want to skip half of the stat block section in order to make something that is easier to run, or kind of put a couple of different, what I tend to do is I know the HP that it'll have at the minimum, and then an HP that it'll have if I go real hard on it. So if it gets crit a few times in the first round, but I really need it to do something narratively, I can go, well, I'm going to use the second HP value. So you can which again, we talked about fudging earlier, but the idea that you don't have to have a fully rendered, ready to go stat block with the right verbiage and stuff is an important difference between the way that we design stuff and the way that you can design stuff.
Wait, I got one further on that. Okay, because I set up all my games online. So when I set up my monsters, and I've set up a trillion of these, this is all I put in. I put in their name. I put in their perception because I need that to roll initiative. I put in their AC, their fort, will, and reflex saves. I put in their HP. And I put in their attacks, and if they have spells, I put in the spells. That's it. I don't bother with languages. I don't even put in the skills. If I need to roll skill, I'll do it manually. I don't put in any of their strengths or dexterity. I don't put in any of that stuff. I don't put in immunities or weaknesses, none of that. I put in the bare minimum. And sometimes I literally just put in, because I have macros, I literally just put in their perception because I have a macro that does combat, and I put in their armor class because I have macros for combat, and all their saves and their HP, and that's it. Sometimes I don't even put in, depending on the monster, I don't even put in their attacks. That's all you need. That's all I need to run the monster within. I usually put in the attacks because it just makes it a little faster, and that's it.
Steven, for you, those other things exist. You just didn't code them in.
I don't.
I do want to get back to the question from. So I would just. Mike gave really good advice for what to do if you want to make a spellcaster monster, and as well as my advice of just don't, or just throw in a few innate spells. But the person who asked the original question said it's kind of hard when you're converting something from another edition that is definitely a spellcaster, like a massive wizard character and
liches, things like that.
A lich, yeah. I mean, even Pathfinder 2 that tried to not do that often. The lich is an example of one that does have 1 million spells. So how do you do that? And I do have some advice for that. Here's my conversion guide for converting a monster that does have to have spells. Here's what you do. Look at what that monster did in whatever your source material you're converting from is. Like Mike said, you're looking for some major combat usage effects and spells. Put those all in. If you want to keep some things from tradition, only keep the ones that are like the big attack, the big crowd control, just like Mike said. But also look at any spells that were necessary for the story, the lore, or the narrative of what that creature did that are completely out of combat spells. Like maybe it had clairvoyance and you're like, I'm converting this and it's important to its story that it spies on people with clairvoyance. So I'll keep that. So keep the ones that are obviously out of combat that are needed for its story. Keep the ones that are very in combat that you definitely want to use. And then you don't need the rest of that. If it is a wizard character, then either follow the advice from Mike and Steven and just write down the spells you're actually going to cast and don't bother with the other ones. And yes, they theoretically have prepared them, but you don't care because you're not going to cast them. Or just the answer, if you're just like, no, I don't want to do any of that, I still want to make a spellcaster character, is, well, our advice doesn't apply. Just build it then. Build it like a PC, pick some spells that could be useful, pick your first level, maybe pick Fleet Step for your 17th level character, which is like Expeditious Retreat in D&D and gives you a lot of movement speed so that you can run around really fast or something like that. Pick spells that you think you're going to get some use out of. It'll just take a long time, but by the time you've built it, you probably know how to run that character. Whereas like Mike was saying about published versus your own creatures, if you're going to publish it, I think it's a mistake in some ways to put in too many spellcaster characters, because if Mike or Steven or I write a creature that has 30 spells and you buy that book, it's going to take you a long time to process, learn, and realize, oh, they put Fleet Step in as a first level spell to increase our movement speed, and I would want to cast it before the fight.
Your eyes might glaze over the mirror image that it must have in order to mitigate damage, and it's calculated into the CR. And that sucks. I mean, you almost need, and this is something I wish every edition did for spellcasters, notes on first round, here's what it must cast, or it's not going to survive. And I don't believe Pathfinder does that. I know D&D doesn't, but it's something that every edition should do, of like optimal
tactics. Don't always
tactics change. Yeah, that's true. But it's nice, especially for monsters that have so many options. It would be really wonderful if, and maybe this is something I'm going to start doing in more of my books. I keep threatening to do it, but I might end up doing it with Extinction before we publish it, is putting in a typical combat note right at the end of the lore section. So it's not in the stat block. It's not crowding that up or changing the format, but saying in a typical combat, they're going to open with this spell, follow it with this spell, and then on a third round, if they're still alive, they'll use this spell. So potentially a creature might dominate a party member, fireball the rest, and then counterspell anything that comes in, right? Those are useful kind of notes to have as a DM, so you know what to prioritize in the monster stat block. Or for a dragon or something that has bite, claw, tail, breath weapon, like what does it open up with? As a DM, telling a DM what they should probably be doing with it. Hey, you want it to fly so that it has the maximum amount of danger factor, or it always should use its breath weapon first to make everyone feel on the ropes and scared. Those are really useful notes to put in. So there's no reason you can't do that with your own homebrew stuff. If you're publishing stuff on a very small third-party scale, try it, see how people react.
If you're doing it just for yourself, you might not need it because you might already know. Like that is the one upside of the fact that you just spent 2 hours selecting all of these spells, is that you really know what the spells are. Although you may want to still remind yourself for when the session actually happens. But I agree with you, Mike. In fact, in Jewel of the Indigo Isles, in our high level adventure, that we did have a few spellcasters and complex characters, and we had a section in their encounters that say typically how they want to engage in the fight. And they might not be able to based on what the PCs are doing, but it talks about tactics like a significant amount. I think that's a good thing to include in adventures, because not only who the creature is, but what the encounter is. And
yeah, you have a complete framework for where it is. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. But that being said, if you're publishing a third-party monster, you don't have the luxury of publishing it in the adventure. So you could come up with sample tactics if you have enough space for it that are like, traditionally, these phase tigers love to ambush. And if they get to do an ambush like they want, it goes something like this. And then you can maybe describe it.
Yeah, I think you don't need it for every monster, but for the ones where you might slow down a DM with analysis paralysis, guidance is something that is really cool to write in, or it'd be something even to leave yourself so you remember how to engage with this monster in the most profitable way against these players. Specifically, maybe I bring down, Ben first because he's the spellcaster and he might disable them. Basic notes like that can really help streamline the way that these things play, because that's the other side of it as well. There's a lot of analysis paralysis in digging through those spells, even if you have a fully rendered spellcaster in front of you.
I bet there's a product idea in there, although admittedly some of the 5e monsters are simple enough to run that you don't need it, because it's like, well, the only thing I'm going to do is multi-attack every turn. But I bet you could have a product that's like the monster manual tactics that goes through every monster and then talks about like how they like to fight.
Mark, I'm so envious of you having gotten that chance to look at a system you love and create a sequel to it, because that's something like the longer and longer I'm in the game design space and like mitigating these things in 5e with my own products, I keep really wanting to like revisit the way that monsters are done and just create my own monster manual that says, yeah, we're going to keep the balance the same, but I really want to change the way that they're presented and the graphic design around them so that they're easier to read and that sort of stuff. Just because I think that there's so much more that we can do in this edition. And I'm going to keep pushing those sorts of boundaries with my third-party content. Right now, the Book of Extinction is, very, very monster manual. And I think I'm going to make some changes to it as it goes on to kind of push some boundaries and make it really different in the way that people engage with it. But
we do that in all of our products.
I think you could still do that product.
You could still do that. We do that in all of our products.
For sure.
I'm breaking
even one that had the monster manual creatures. I think you could do
break
a
every mold there
that
is.
was literally it had SRD monster manual creatures or Creative Commons now if you want to. If they were too simplistic, you could make a more complicated version of them that had a few new abilities.
And I agree. I'm just saying
tactics for all of them.
I'm just saying I would love to create that sort of thing and then have it be in a main system so that it's not well, just my little niche corner of the world is using monsters in this completely new way. That's what I'm so envious about, that you got to take some of your ideas and then have them repeated writ large so that the third party space follows a new and cooler avenue, and that your balance, is like for sure good, instead of maybe the DMG is good on this, maybe not. But yeah, I'm currently still making supplements, and I'm going to keep making supplements for the biggest RPG products that are out there instead of making my own thing, because I know the economics behind that. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it's extremely risky, and I mean, for better, one of these days I'll fulfill all my threats and make a standalone system that won't perform well on Kickstarter.
Well, for better for worse, 5e is the leader, and 5e was designed very different than I think it's a fascinating system, because it seems like people who stick with the product for long periods of time enjoy it, and then they start to see, and I think this is true of anything, of life, it's that you start to see the holes and you start to want to improve it or change it or modify it, and then and you do that either by buying supplements or buying, something from DM's Guild, or building it, or making your own supplements and then adding new things that you want in the game. The issue I have sometimes with 5e is that you're fighting the mechanics, and the mechanics and the math are the skeleton and lifeblood of the game, and that is when Pathfinder first came out, second edition. I was talking to Param a lot about this, is that I saw the math, Mark, and like I saw the math. Like I see how the math works. I see how everything is connected. And that was like, okay, this system's going to be good just because it has such a strong framework that people don't have to worry about changing things constantly or adjusting it. It's like they can just spend time on building cool crap, knowing that it's going to work. And that's very big in software development too. It's like, how many times are you actually just using the system and building? And that is the secret of some of the best video game platforms and systems because they're easy to build. The ones that are easy to build and work on are the ones that are successful, and the ones that are hard and that you're fighting the system and the OS are hard to build, and then you're not going to have as many good games.
It's sort of a generational process, right? Fifth edition is really revolutionary if you compare it to 3.5, right? It's these huge kind of steps, and it's at the very beginning of the stream, I complained a little bit about where 6e seems to be going, and I don't think it's making huge steps in terms of making the game easier to run for DMs and making player options, that much more flexible and evocative. It's a little like 5e, which is okay if you just want to capture the 5e audience. But as a designer, I really want to push things forward. So, right now that means, trying to create an educational supplement about extinct animals in D&D. And maybe in the future, that's going to be completely rewriting the way that we do monsters. But I think there's a lot of space out there for people to kind of innovate within these systems.
Yeah.
The designer's spirit. Like, people often ask, like, all the time, it's like, are you thinking of rules for like a new game or a new edition of a game? And the answer is all designers are always.
Like, you can't get away from it. It's in your skull, and you kind of, it's the instincts that you develop when you're designing stuff. You start seeing things in the core system you would be designing out, right?
Even if you wrote the system,
yes,
then you're just like, by the time it comes out for everyone else, you have ideas of how to refine it. Just always, it's being a game designer.
Yeah, it's such a different mindset that it's hard to impress on people sometimes. I don't know if you have that where people, go, well, no, you just have to work around these, and it's like you could uproot it, you could completely change it. It's a different kind of spirit.
Well, from what I've been hearing through the pipeline, is I've been hearing they are been very carefully, and I think they went back to the drawing board. WotC has been making sure. I don't know how much 6e was supposed to be like 5e, but what I've been hearing is they're making it a lot more like 5e quickly. From what I've been hearing.
I mean, they originally said it was
going to be that was BS. I don't think that was true.
Everybody always say that, except for when it's such a distinctive gap.
They didn't want their sales to plummet.
Like 4e.
They didn't want their sales to plummet, and I think their sales did plummet because of a combination of that. It just naturally happens if you're going to say your new edition, and suddenly people just hold off. And also, they put out a couple products that got really bad reviews. Oh, by the way, I was wrong. I kept saying about Spelljammer how they put out 3 96-page books. Mark, there are 3 64-page hardcover books.
Oh, okay. Because I thought it was shorter than 96.
So 64-page hardcover book.
That's not a hardcover. That's a hardcover magazine.
I know. Like, a hardcover book is 64 pages, and so do you have 40 pages of content?
They skipped ship combat in space. People came and bought my Dark Matter book.
I know.
They were coming up to me at cons going, "Hey, Mike, I wanted to play Starfinder, Spelljammer, but it doesn't have these important things that should be in any sci-fi setting." And they came and picked up my book to fix that problem. Right. And I think that's why, I'm sure we come back to this subject a lot about the OGL recently. But this is one of those reasons that third-party creators are so vital in this space. It's because you can't expect, any company to make
which is why they wanted
decisions all the time.
Put us out of business. How dare you come out with Dark Matter and make us look bad?
They could just license it from the kids.
You know what we did at Gen Con? Actually had a fun exchange, Mark, is I gave him my books and he gave me his books, and we just did a trade. So
if any other creators hit me up at Con, I will do that with you.
I know. I was doing that with everyone.
It's going to be a great time.
That's a big thing at Gen Con. Like, being at the Paizo booth, we would have people come over for like the top board games or whatever, who are also Pathfinder players. Like, hey, I have this.
We'll trade you
new board game. Can we trade you for like the new Pathfinder books? And then we'll get a trade and bring it back to the game back to the office as like a reference game or something like that.
So we got something geeky that no one else is going to care about. But I think Mike is the only other person I know. You do your own layout and design too, right?
Yeah, I do the bulk of the writing. I sometimes bring.
Well, you're nuts. You do everything. I don't do the writing.
I do the editing, and then I do all of the graphic design. It's so important to me that your editor and your graphic designer are like hand in hand. If you can make them the same person,
yes.
do it, because when something is a couple sentences too long to fit on a page, you got to cut that down, and you got to have somebody who is like living and breathing the material to do it right.
Well, I'm the
that's me all the way through.
That works when you don't have everyone being the same person, is that it is laid out and then sent back to the
back and forth. There has to be deep collaboration.
To the developer, designer, or the author if they're in-house. So the person who knows it absolutely the most, and since you are all of those, Mike, then you send it back to yourself. But the person who knows it the most is the one who's going to know what can be cut that won't mess something up. Even the best editors in the business are not going to unilaterally do that, because they know that sometimes in rules language, that one word that they think in English language was not necessary suddenly messes everything up, because players have a weird way that they will want to cheese weaselly interpret it, and that one word was stopping that.
And you know what? As a writer, it makes me stronger, because I can find a paragraph and go, how do I condense that down into 2 sentences from 4? And I'll create better material from that. Nothing is really getting cut. It's just getting refined and sharpened. And especially, I think with all of my books, that comes through this kind of singularity of purpose and focus. Like, not to pat myself too much on the back, but if that's something that like distinguishes me from other bigger companies, I'll take it, right? And I think you're going to see a lot of that with the Book of Extinction out right now. As far as a monster product, it's very unusual because it has these real stories juxtaposed with these fantastical, like, monster manual entries, and finding ways to connect those in unexpected ways so that you can see where the monsters inspiration came from. Like the Carolina parakeet. If you're someone who lives in the southern United States, you probably know that was declared extinct a couple of years ago. And that one, no, that was declared extinct a little while back. It was the last specimen that we had was frozen and shipped to the Smithsonian. And it got lost in the mail.
Oh my God.
Oh,
the last specimen. So we made our version of the Carolina parakeet this like frozen Fey Lord, and just that idea that it was frozen and lost in the mail, like just echoed around the end of that end of that description. So it made perfect sense to kind of write the next one as being like innately frozen, like, tragically frozen by its backstory. Which is a really beautiful story if you pick up the book.
So I was going to say really cool. That you see and us. So I do the editing and I do all the layout and design. Mark, I will copy fit once in a while, but quite frankly, I got Mark, so I have him do a lot of it.
I've had to do some big copy fit disasters over the years working at Paizo, and so it'll sometimes Steven. It's definitely a joy to work with Steven, who's doing all of the other stuff together, because he is also very accommodating on helping with the layout. But then sometimes he'll be very apologetic and be like, "Oh, well, you're going to have to add this much," and it is legitimately a lot. And I'm like, "No, that's hard. That's a lot." But I got
it's very rare.
Paizo, I've sometimes had to do
it's very
10 times
rare.
this much in the worst case scenario. So I've learned the skills from it.
It's so wild getting to talk with people who have that exact same level of like, I do all this stuff, and it's so boring for anyone else who listens to us, because we're just talking about
You'd be surprised because now people want to know how to do this.
Handle InDesign and the way that we structure stat
well,
blocks
that's
so that
all
it flows around stuff.
That's all.
Those are the things that
we're not going to get that level. But I will tell you, Mark, one thing I did for you is that the 5e version of Jewel of Indigo Isles, I could not get it to fit on a 2-page layout. It was impossible. So I literally commissioned 2 more pieces of artwork just for chapter 9. And so 5e version of Indigo Isles has 2 pieces of artwork that don't exist in Pathfinder.
Oh, wow.
I'm really in the Book of Extinction. I'm relishing those gaps because I get to go and find real art of the monsters to put them into the book.
Yeah, for you, yeah. Well, and I don't have that. It's all commissioned work.
I know, yeah. So in this one case, I get to do that, and it adds this value where it's like at the end of a movie where they go, and this is based on a real story. Here's the actor. Here's the real person. See how well we matched it. We get to do the same thing with monster and real animal and put them side by side. And it's the most edifying, interesting thing. So you get to see those decisions we made kind of in the flow, in the flow of the book. And it's that's the thing I'll never get over with this book. I'm so excited about being able to do that and being able to kind of space out the text in a way that gives you the space for that sort of description.
A helpful Drought said he's beating Google Docs in submissions, complex layouts. We do it on hard mode here because if all of our layouts, we do copy fit exact. So every page, there's no white space at the bottom of our pages. How about that?
Yeah, Paizo does that too. It's a holdover from the magazine days when magazines had to do that, and in my opinion, is too draconian. But that is what Pathfinder looks like.
It's not that hard. We
want to look like Paizo does.
It's actually not that bad once you get the hang of it. I don't know. I've gotten pretty good at it. So
I minimize my white space, but I think it creates a secondary challenge of finding cool things to do with that white space when it's unavoidable. I don't have that massive constraint, so I try to find interesting ways to insert flavor, like quotes.
You do a lot of quotes. I noticed
in the Book of Extinction. I get to quote actual historical things. There's this terrifying quote from someone who literally wrote down the things that he did on this voyage, where three men went to this island to kill the final great ox. Damn. And literally the quote in this book is, "I caught it close to the edge, a precipice many fathoms deep. I took him by the neck and he flapped his wings. He made no cry. I strangled him." And it is one of the most that's him strangling the life out of the very last great auk, which is this kind of bird in the net. Crazy stuff I can put in this book. So I'm relishing these gaps at the bottom of the pages because there's so much history I can put in right next to it. And it's so crazy when you know the stories.
So those are so I did that too in the when I worked at a newspaper. Those are called sandwich quotes because you sandwich them in, by the way. It's the technical term, but yes, you do that to fill up space when you don't have a graphic. You use text. And Mike uses
cheaper, and I think it's evocative.
No, it's a good crutch. I just put in another picture. That's how I do it. I also have 10,000 artists on standby. So when I need stuff pretty quick, they're pretty.
That's actually where we differ. I try to keep 2 or 3 people around, paid very consistently for a long period of time.
Oh, and these are all paid consistently. I just never stop giving them stuff.
Right. Yeah. Having a smaller team has always helped me keep more consistency in the art, even if I think we get fewer crazy ideas sometimes.
The problem with that is, and I tried that, except that then one of my best artists just had got a job as a professor, and that he's gone, and this actually happened more than once. So it's it's really challenging. So I got a little crutchy on that, and that also even happened with my maps and stuff. I've learned my lesson, and that's why I have a huge cadre of artists, because if I can't have that, I can't have it that someone disappears and I'm screwed. So, but anyhow, we've gone way too long. Let's see. Do artists toss you the guys to PSD so you kind of tweak pictures, pop them out?
Mine do, but I normally just use a backgroundless PNG. I don't actually tweak stuff unless I'm creating too much, unless I'm doing promo images. But yeah, normally I like to have a PSD around if I'm creating. I also do the videos for our Kickstarters, so I can create animations with parallax if you kind of put them into After Effects and create this kind of 3D zooming thing. So if you go to the Book of Extinction's Kickstarter page, go to deadmonstermanual.com. You can see a video I'd put together in literally 24 hours that kind of uses the advantages of having some PSDs around.
Yeah, I mean, everything's
I think it's pretty atypical for people to make major tweaks on the art that they receive in. However, when I was at Peak Paizo, generally it was just you got it. This is what you've got. You can maybe ask the artist to change it, but sometimes that would be difficult to do unless it was really a serious problem. You needed a picture of a hippo, and one time we got a dude with a hippo head. And I was like, no, this needs to be a hippo. And it did get changed to a hippo. But one thing that was cool is that Paizo added an art director named Kent Hamilton, who is just also an artist who's done amazing work for Paizo before, and he was able to touch up.
Yeah, they can do overpaints. That's a really great thing about having a lead artist on a project where, if I have, I keep a small team of artists and I say, this one's the lead artist on this project. Their aesthetic vision is what everyone else has to follow. And if they don't like something that's being placed in the book, which is going to have their name and lead artist, they have the ability to ask them to go back and make small changes or do an overpaint themselves. So usually the designers like Mark, or the graphic designers like Steven, are not the people to make those sorts of aesthetic changes. You want to have a lead artist who has a full vision of what is being evoked in these, every single page, that has the authority to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, everything is provided in PSD. I mean, it has to be. And I have a whole methodology because I get very detailed outlines, and then I get sketches, and then depending, sometimes I get color, and then I get finals. And I've been working with people long enough. One of them, I just basically say go, and I'm just like, here you go. And then I always get a sketch. I always have to get a sketch. But I actually do change. I was like, I literally just changed the PSD today. And I did one yesterday for Battles of Strange and Unusual after I got it from the artist, and he's gone. He's like, I'm like, oh, can you do something? He goes, I'm out for the next month. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do it myself, and I just did. And if I can't do it, I give it to one of my professional artists, and they do it. So, but yeah. Oh, it's so helpful now. So sometimes characters and APs are wielding the wrong weapons. Yeah, that happens all the time because the art order might go in way before the adventure's written. So you just give up on that. You're never going to get that. It's never going to happen.
I give my artists a lot of free reign to make choices about race, apparent ethnicity of the character, weapons and armor, so that they have even things like poses. I give them tons of free reign to do a lot of that stuff. And if it's not perfect, that's just kind of how it goes. Sometimes I actually modify the statistics or the written description around what they give me because they've given me something so evocative and so cool. I kind of change it into that. So those are really like edge cases, and you want to allow for those edge cases because the artists are professionals. They can bring so much to your book if you just let them. If you squeeze them too tight, you're going to burn them out, and they won't feel like they're practicing an art.
You don't need to put in too many details about and they're facing this direction and this is how their hair is. However, one of the things that you mentioned are on my list of things that you kind of need to tell the artist, because otherwise you'll get defaults that you're maybe not looking for, which is when you're looking for ethnicities, when you're looking for genders, when you're looking for
that's something I've had to do very consistently now.
If you're not okay with getting a young white guy who's attractive looking,
and my main artists are people of color, and they still default that way.
Yeah.
So it's something we have to, and I think it is imperative that as third-party creators and designers, we stay up on representation, even if we assume that it's going to go it's out of our hands, and we're not really guiding that in a way that is narrow. We have to actively push people to create things that are more diverse and more inclusive. It is so imperative we do that at all times.
Yeah.
And we're so three white dudes talking about D&D.
Tell them.
It's not. We are not diverse enough as it is. We need to create a space that is. This is a topic for an entire a call and potentially
so
one.
If you want age, a character that is your artist is going to give you, if you don't tell them, someone who is youthful, 18 to early 20s, or maybe someone who's very old. If you're it's a wizard or a witch, they look like they could be 70, but you're never going to get someone who's 40 to 50 unless you specifically ask that you want something in that range. And body type, if you want someone who is a little more overweight, the artist might give you a character who is extremely overweight if you're not careful, more than you wanted the character to appear, and they will often give idealized proportions just because that's kind of what culture has brought into standard. But if you want a character that is, they are in the category that would be considered overweight but not obese by medically, you have to be very specific on some of those things.
So we've gone 2 hours, and I actually have something to do. But before this happens, Mark, we got a new watch
Yes.
party because D&D Direct on March 28th, next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, they're doing a 30-minute video where they're going to give a first look of the D&D virtual tabletop tie-ins for Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, which I saw and was fantastic, by the way.
I've heard it's really good.
Oh, it's so good. And more. In fact, you can watch our review, myself and Jason McDonald, on this channel, which we did on Sunday night. I gave it a 8.5 out of 10, which is high for me.
That's a pretty high
It's
score
high
for you,
for me.
Steven. You're a very, very discerning with films, and you've seen like a million.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But Jason gave it an 8 out of 10. It's extremely well made, and they really knew what they were doing, and it is
So
fantastic.
just to help people, what did you give the 2000 Dungeons and Dragons movie out of 10?
Like a 1.
Okay, there you go. So it's 7.5 points better.
Oh, well, that movie's unwatchable. I mean,
It's
it's
terrible.
it's
Just
unwatchable.
bad.
It's unwatchable. And the only reason I gave it a 1 is because at least they tried. I'd actually give it a 0. It was so bad. If it was stars, I'd give it 0. It was terrible. No, this movie is absolutely fantastic. But that's the first time that they have done something really public that hasn't been the apology tour, I think, since December, since the OGL incident. So I'm going to be very interested.
I mean, they've had little videos about the play tests, I think, that
Not
have been
really.
coming up. But this is more of a overall marketing push. And is that going to come out before or after the summit? I'm forgetting
Before.
what the timing.
The summit is
Before.
next
Okay.
weekend, and
Okay.
this is next Tuesday.
I see. So it'll be just before the summit
Yes.
that they show that video. So yeah, we can do a little watch party
No,
of it.
we're definitely doing a watch party.
Awesome. So that's
Um,
9 a.m. Pacific. I'll be there for that.
Well,
so I guess
we'll get
will
up
we
a
be
little
playing-
earlier because we'll start it earlier.
Yeah.
We'll-
But will we be playing the video
Yeah.
as it's on
Yeah.
and then making our own comments?
yeah. Yeah.
All right, perfect. I'm
a
sure
watch
people are
party.
going to be interested in seeing
That sounds like a good time.
Yeah. Well, last
I'll be
time we
tuning
did a
in.
watch party, we had 9,000 people, so we should probably have a
like
few this time.
literally at 1.9,000. And Wizards did not actually
Do
the
it.
thing
They
during
didn't
the
do
watch
it.
party. So, but
I didn't remember
the
that, yeah.
orc license got announced near the
Yeah,
end. of
yeah,
that
we
watch
got
Which
the
was
same.
which was huge. Yeah.
Oh, and somebody
Man,
asked me
that was a
what
wild
did I
time.
give the sequel, the D&D sequel? The D&D sequel is like a 3 out of 10. It actually tried that. Actually, they did some pretty cool things in the sequel, and because it's so hokey and goofy, I kind of enjoyed it. There is a part where someone teleports into a wall, which I loved, and I was like, yes, there you go, you got it right. But this movie, oh God, it's so good. I'm gonna actually see it again. That's how good it was. It's incredibly funny. In fact, I brought my son who doesn't play D&D, doesn't play any role playing games, knows nothing, and he loved it. So that's your litmus test. You got people who know nothing about D&D, and you got people who know everything, and they both love it. I'm like, that is the holy grail for Hollywood, is they can hit the whole audience, like everyone, and they did. They're gonna do it. So, yeah, if you want to watch my recording, it's me and Jason. The first half hour of the review is spoiler free, and then the next hour or so is spoiler, but it's actually light spoilers. We don't really go into detail. We just talk about specific scenes. And my favorite part of this movie is that there's a lot of things that happen in this movie that are now going to become part of the gaming table, which they obviously did on purpose, but they're good. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be using that in my tables in the future, because they had some pretty funny jokes, and they obviously know what they're doing, and they obviously were players. And if you watch it, anyone who plays D&D, you're going to sit there and say, I know what that spell is. I know what that spell is. I know what that, like, every spell is a spell from the game, and you know what they are. Like that alone, I was like, yeah. And it worked. They didn't just like fit them in. They actually were part of the story. So
does it have visuals and sound effects of the spells? Because that might make it a video game.
well, it is a video game, but they own it. I'll tell you one thing that was interesting is at the beginning of the movie, they did say, Dungeons and Dragons, own a Hasbro property, so
Oh, I heard about that.
it's not a WotC
It does-
property, it's a Hasbro
It's also
property.
interesting because, like, usually, like, when Marvel's doing things, right, they would put the special thanks for, like, some of the, like, original comic people.
Oh, they
whereas
do
with
that
this one, it
for.
just said Hasbro.
They do that so they don't get sued. There's actually, you have Harlan Ellison to thank for that. If you don't know who Harlan Ellison is, well, look him up and you'll have enough to read for the next year because there's a lot of information on him, and he was extremely litigious, and he sued Marvel and won back in the day, and so they have a lot of these rules because of him, and that's one of them. So yes. Because he sued them because he basically said they didn't give him credit. And not only did he win, but then Marvel had this funny thing. They had to send him every single comic book they ever made ever for all time. Can you imagine? Like every day you get like another shipment. It's just like endless. It's like anything Marvel ever did. Ever. They had to send him.
At that point. That's amazing.
I know. Well, think about that. It's like, that's so much. It's so much. That's everything. That was part of the law. That was part of his litigation, and it was basically because he didn't get credit. So now everyone puts in credit in their movies because they do not want to get Harlan Ellison. So they're like, and yeah, you can look him up. He's a fascinating guy. I used to watch him all the time when he was alive, and he would go to cons here constantly, and I saw him probably like 20, 30 times, and he is, was he a character? And now he's dead, unfortunately. Oh yeah, he sued over the Terminator. He sued over everything. He sued everyone at any time. I think, he won the Terminator suit too. It was settled out of court. Is that he wrote a time travel. Problem is that he wrote short stories, and he was prolific, so he has thousands and thousands of short stories, and he was in Hollywood. So the second anyone had anything that was even remotely close to his work, he'd sue them. And unfortunately, there's a lot of parallel stories in the world, and he sued a lot of people, and a lot of them would just pay him off because it wasn't worth it. So he was ahead of his time. Anyhow, I have to go. And where can we find your fun stuff, Mike? I put the link to the Kickstarter.
For those of you who started watching and hadn't heard the spiel, I'm currently running a Kickstarter called the Book of Extinction, which is a D&D 5e bestiary where we tell the real stories of extinct animals, and then we kind of reimagine them as fantasy creatures you can play in your games. You can find that by going to Kickstarter or going to deadmonstermanual.com. We just literally, while we were on the stream, we got another stretch goal unlocked. It only launched yesterday, and we're going real strong. So if this seems at all like something you're interested in, go pledge or go tell someone about it. Like if you have someone in your life who is a biology person or is interested in conservation, tell them about it, because I think they're going to really embrace it. It's a really cool product.
And Mark, you're just here. You're just hanging out. You're always with me some way, or you're doing your own thing.
You can find me here. You can also find me on twitch.tv/arcademark if you want. You can find me in a lot of places.
You're just everywhere. He's just wherever you go, Mark appears. You mention Paizo or Pathfinder, and Mark shows up, and he gives a comment, and everyone's like, "Ooh!"
Here from like the Fey realm, and it's like, yes, would you like to make a bargain?
That's right. You literally are a Fae. If I had to make a creature out of you, Mark, you'd be a Fae creature that has the ability to appear when his name is spoken. You're like Rumpelstiltskin or something.
Yeah, there you go.
It's like
all magic comes at a price.
It was lovely being here, Stephen. It's always wonderful hanging out with you. Mark, I love talking design with you. This was great. Check out the booth at Gen Con, and I'll give you some books, and we'll hang out for a bit.
Wow, you're actually having you get a whole booth, man. I'm too lazy.
Man, it's work, but I love seeing people there. I love every once in a while somebody who's read my stuff pins me down and asks me 1,000 questions about design, and I genuinely love it. It is my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's always a really, really good time. It's tons of work, but I love seeing people.
I think I'm just sharing my booth, or I'm putting my books at Paizo's booth this year. Just make it easier. That way I don't have to do anything. All right. Well, looks like we'll have a watch party on Tuesday, and then we'll probably have something next week too. So, and by the way, before we finish, if you want to see, if you subscribe to our newsletter, we did a big preview of the Elemental Avatar. So check that out.
It's got the intro to the class as well as the key terms sidebar.
Yeah. If you just go to battlezoo.com or roll for comment, you can sign up for the newsletter, and we're going to do more next week. And then if you pre-order Eldamon, you get it, and you'll get to play test it and give us feedback and see and be really cool. So if you want to be cool, hang out. Hang out with us. All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Bye.